Hi, I'm Tom, otherwise known as the Grandeur Master. As a GM running many weekly games, sometimes I simply don't have the time to be original. I don't see that as a shortcoming. There are varying degrees of unoriginality. In this series, I want to showcase my thought processes as a relatively busy GM on mining the gold out of modules and supplements, importing them to my own home games, and getting the best value out of what I've already got. This method works whether you've already run the entire module or whether you've never run it and it's been gathering dust on your bookshelf for far too long. There's always something of value to be taken from modules like this, especially because the Wild Beyond the Witchlight just so happens to be my favourite 5e adventure. My number one tip from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight is to take its advice. Start your adventure at a funfair, a carnival, or a village fete. Somewhere filled with joy, happiness, and that all-important restful calm that you can then disrupt at your pleasure. First off, this is far more original than starting in your classic tavern, and also has the benefit of offering a broad range of activities for your characters to be getting on doing. From feasting, stall games, attractions, rides, fortune telling. There are so many varied things that can be present at a fun fair that have a really interesting setup and can tie much better in with your characters' backstories and personalities than simply grabbing a drink. Additionally, I'm sure we've all tried to run our first session at some point. It helps, trust me, it helps if there is a slightly chiller vibe than starting, let's say, in medias res with roll initiative. While that may be a great way to go for some groups, if your players haven't really got the hang of each other and how they're feeling out each other's roleplay at this point, it can often be a little bit of a stunted introduction that perhaps sets things off on the wrong foot. Because after all, this is a social game. Another reason why a fairground start is just wonderful is that it's relatively low stakes, or rather as low stakes as you choose it to be. I'd recommend using the Witchlight's concept of a thief going around ruining people's days, or even just trying to take something important from the carnival. I've myself used this in multiple games and had great success. Indeed, one of my long-term games started at a funfair legally very clearly distinct from the Witchlight Carnival. I will also say, on a personal note, your players are likely to get pretty invested if they're having a nice time at the fair and someone's spoiling it. Perhaps even more invested than when the local shepherd comes in and tells them some bandits have been worrying sheep. The second thing I really want you to take from this module and put into your games is a magic item found near the very back of the book. The Scissors of Shadow Snipping. Try saying that one 3 times fast. This is an incredibly cool item. It allows the user to cut away individual shadows, taking control of them and sending them out into the world as fey shadows, leaving the individuals who have had their shadows stolen cursed. Now, I won't give too much away about the module, just in case you're in the middle of playing it, but I will say this. One of the recurrent characters in this module makes excellent use of these, and it very much thematically ties in with their whole deal. Now, the reason I recommend you to steal these is because they're so versatile. You can put these on a low-level bad guy just to add that little bit of extra threat and intrigue, especially because these shadows are controllable. This works brilliantly for any sort of villain who is likely to find out information that they would otherwise not have access to, who needs spies in strange places, and who needs a certain air of mystique around them. Controlling shadows themselves is such a thematically powerful concept it can really get under some players' skin and make that villain stand out as a threat. It also has the added benefit of producing instant minions whenever you need them. Quite scary ones as well. And as the magic item specifies that the created shadows don't instantly kill players they reduce to 0, but rather knock them unconscious, there's a lot of wiggle room there for you to send some terrifying threats your players' way. Additionally, when your players get a hold of this item, they've got a really interesting moral choice to make. Do they want to curse people for the amazing benefits that this item gives them? Do they want their own army of shadows? Do they want to become their enemy? The amount of creative uses and creative plot points that can spiral off from this item makes it very much worthy of inclusion in this list of things you can just take and put wholesale into your game to make it more intriguing. The third thing I want to suggest is not so much a single feature of this book, but a coherent part of the book's very design. It is the only 5e module to my knowledge that can reasonably be completed without rolling initiative once. Now that might sound weird to you. After all, D&D and many systems like it have robust and interesting combat systems. Half of your players' skills are only really usable in combat. But I think it's a design philosophy that I want you to steal from this. Encounters don't have to be predicated upon combat. It adds realism to your world if individuals are willing to negotiate rather than fight to the surrender or fight to the death every single time. After all, people in your world should reasonably have self-preservation instincts, and running headlong into a party of 5 brave adventurers who have just stormed a keep is not always the best way to go. Additionally, I just think this module takes the non-combat route into stark consideration for every encounter it designs. Every individual you might fight has a motivation, a want, a need, or something of that description that can be gleaned from their surrounding environment. Of course, your players may well miss it. Early on, there is an enemy that lives within a well who has specific stated wants and needs. One group I've run this adventure with found a way to incorporate the non-violent approach to that encounter as well. It also really helps with GM preparation. Having an idea of what your bad guys might want, need, or desire, or be willing to compromise to your party, is a really effective way of not only getting in their headspace, but of designing encounters that have multiple win conditions, making the game feel far less stale and much more dynamic, like a living world. If your bandits are constantly fighting to the death until the last man who maybe he surrenders throwing down his sword in a lost fight, maybe consider taking a few leaves out of this book's design philosophy. Who knows, perhaps your players are more creative than you give them credit for. The fourth thing that I urge you to steal from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight are Redcaps. Now these little creatures are amazing. When I first saw the name in this book as I was reading it for the first time, I was really excited. I've loved Redcaps as part of Fey lore for quite some time. They're interestingly dark little Fey creatures, and they have all the hallmarks of an excellently designed D&D villain. They have some sort of mystical element to their creation, some strange bizarre lore. They are only ever created where blood is spilled intentionally. Then they grow up as little blood-stained toadstool looking creatures, only to pull themselves out of the ground having fully grown when the moonlight hits them. Angry, bloodthirsty little Fey creatures with iron boots and wicked sickles. They hunger for blood, but not only that, they always know where the individual who spilled the blood that created them is. They have an immediate way of tracking you down if you disturb the peace of a Fey forest, or even just somewhere slightly spooky, and can serve as an excellent extra encounter for the day. If your players have had a bit of a cakewalk through a forest, but have committed some unspeakable acts of bloody murder, as is relatively likely with certain groups of players, they may find a redcap or two, tromping their way to their campsite in their heavy iron boots, sickles ready to douse their red caps in blood. If they don't, douse their Redcaps in blood, by the way. Every 3 days, they disappear. These monsters can be imported to any kind of spooky forested setting. It doesn't have to be Fae, it can be Fae adjacent as well. They are a folkloric Fae legend that scares the willies out of anyone who meets them. And they pack a really solid punch for a low CR monster. If you think your players are having a bit too easy of a time hacking and slashing their way through a forest, then perhaps after a fight they find a few toadstools, speckled red. If they don't know what a redcap is at this point, you have an excellent ambush opportunity. If they do know, they might still rethink their actions. Nobody wants a bloodthirsty, loud, homicidal Fae creature who always knows where they are. The fifth thing I think you should steal from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight is a little bit of a strange one. It's a minigame. At a certain point in this module, your characters are going to end up improvising a theatrical performance. Now the book does a really good job of this. It has a collection of intriguing lines right at the back, ready to be incorporated into the improvised play that your characters are going to put on. It's a really fun idea for a session, perhaps something a little more light-hearted, where maybe some theatre owner has had a real tragedy happen to his theatre troupe and needs some people to step in very quickly. Perhaps some wandering Fae has decreed that every man, woman and child in the land shall perform for him, and your players are first. Every time I've run this, it's been really quite fun. Even in groups where there aren't heavy role players, the lines in the back of this book are really helpful in bringing such people out of their shells and getting them engaged in the world, in the game, and in the performance that you're putting on together. If you want a theatrically themed session, this is an excellent introduction to it. And I think the setup from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight works really well, as some powerful entity demands that this be done on very short notice. Now, a few honourable mentions of things that you can definitely steal from this book and put straight into your game, but might be a little less session changing than some of the things we've discussed already. One is the excellent Feywild trinkets table. Right at the front of the book, there's a D100 table of interesting little things that can be picked up along the travels of your party. If you're stuck for any inspiration at all as to what might be in an interesting drawer or an interesting strongbox, this is the perfect place for it. Some have minor magical properties, some are just incredibly interesting, and some of these items tell stories all by themselves. Additionally, some of the name-dropped NPCs are really quite interesting. You have a whole suite of villains and heroes that can be put in anywhere in your game if you're running out of creativity one week, as well as a few name drops that I've personally used in my home games. Right near the end of this book, there is a single letter addressed to certain nefarious individuals from a Rotten Ethel. Now, she never comes up again, but something about that name triggered something in my mind. And now Rotten Ethel lives somewhere in my world. Well, lived. You know who you are. Now, any discussion of this book might not be complete without mentioning the Harengon and Fairy species that are contained within it. These are really interesting species that have an awful lot of roleplay potential and especially tie very well into the Feywild. Now, I would suggest that GMs take these and put them in their games, of course, but I would imagine your players are already pestering you to do so they can play rabbit folk and fairy folk to their heart's content. So that is what I, as a GM running loads of games every week, steal from this module. All of these tips I have used in my own games to make things more interesting, to add nuance, wrinkles and creativity, because frankly this book was written by a lot of people, a lot of brilliant creative minds, and I'm just one guy. Why not mine this as a resource? Even after I've played through the campaign multiple times, I can still get value out of this book, and that's the important thing. Take from what you have, take inspiration from the creativity of others, and your world just gets richer. Thank you for watching. I hope I've helped you see this art of ethical stealing from others in a slightly more positive light. You're really taking small themes, small hints, and bringing them in to make your world richer. If you'd like more videos in this style, I have a bunch of books, supplements, all that good stuff to discuss. But with that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Make sure you like, subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.